Okay, create statement and run select query. Okay, iterate over reduce it. Alright, so there are many things we are doing with the JDBC. Right, in JDBC we are doing all these things for doing a single query execution. But in order to, I mean, there are some disadvantages in JDBC to avoid these repeated doing things, right? Framework has to do these all these things automatically, and you have to close the connection every time. You have to take care of, programmer has to take care of closing the connection, right? So in order to avoid these repeated code writing, right? Redundant code. This is called as redundant code, and also this is called as all is a template, right? Loading the driver, create a connection, create statement. All is a template. So JDBC is called boiler template coding. Okay, boiler template coding. That means what is meant by template? It's a everything is common. The data will be changed. The JDBC URL, all these things will be changed, right? So this is called boiler template coding, JDBC. So in uh, in this right, so this is the one of the disadvantage of JDBC, right? Another disadvantage of JDBC is, see, suppose in our examples only, right? So what we did, whatever the request we submitted, suppose in add employee sublet, okay. So we have taken all in an employee object. We pass this employee object to add employee DAO, right? So in add employee DAO, what we did, we have taken get name, get age, and get address. So we have taken this, right? We have taken this, and we have to form our own insert query. We have to form our own insert query, right? There are two things. One is we have to manually take employee.get name, employee.get age, employee.get. So if it is a 20 attributes, we have to get all the attributes of the employee manually, and we have to form the query, insert query. And suppose if you know about the queries, right? So there are many functions provided by the database specific to database. If you want a date in your database, suppose in your Oracle, you have to use some method. If you want to use for getting the date in some SQL server, there should be a different. Suppose if you want date in Oracle, you have to use this date. In SQL server, you have to use different, right? Get time. Get time is the get time or get date you will use in the SQL server. There are many functions provided by the each of database, right? So suppose if I write SQL statement specific to the Oracle, tomorrow if I want to change from Oracle to the SQL server, I cannot change straightforward, right? I cannot change. If I change JDBC URL, it will not change. Username and password, it will not change. I have to change many of the queries. I have to go back to all my business code, and I should understand the business impact also, right? And also I have to change all my queries. I have to change all my queries used in my system, used in my project. That means JDBC is a database dependent. It's not database independent, right? JDBC is a because we are writing manually the queries specific to the databases, right? Specific to the databases. So I don't want like that. Tomorrow if I change, just I should be able to change the configuration SQL Server to Oracle. I should say SQL Server. Now today I am using Oracle. That complete configuration, complete program project should work. We should not do any changes, right? That is the another disadvantage of JDBC, right? And we should have a more knowledge on the database, right? Suppose we are insert into employee means you should be able to already create an employee table in the database, right? You already create a table in the database. Suppose employee has departments, right? One to many or one to one relationship with the database. Nowadays, everyone are using relational database management systems. What is meant by relational? Bec- Uh, suppose one table to another table, there should be a relation. Otherwise, there is no reason to use it. So, suppose employee is there, department is there. So, you have employee, you have department. Right. So from employee to department, you have some relation, right? One to one or one to many. Employee has department or department has employee, right? You have relation, right? So the relationship you have to maintain. You have to create your foreign. What is the foreign key? You have to maintain the structure. You have to maintain everything. Programmer has to take care, right? So and so this is the one of the disadvantage in JDBC. So what are the disadvantages in JDBC? You have to write a boiler template coding. You have to programmer has to take care of creating the connections. Programmer has to take care of closing the connections properly, right? And every program I have to write in the try catch block. So right? So creating a connection, closing a connection, all this is called a boiler template coding. Okay, we have to avoid the redundant code. We have to avoid the redundant code. This is the first disadvantage of JDBC. One more disadvantage of JDBC is JDBC is a database dependent. So where if you want to write if you want to run any queries in the database using JDBC, right? You normally write a specific to database. Query specific to database. Tomorrow, if you want to change from one database to other, that is common, right? Suppose today I started using Oracle, right? Because Oracle is a commercial tool. I realized that after 1 year or 2 years I realized that Oracle is a rise since it is taking more than I am earning. I am earning 2 lakh dollars, but out of that I am paying $1 lakh to Oracle itself. So uh, uh, it's not a recommended, right? So it's not suggestible. So at that time, suppose if the same work is also doing any open source databases, so I can use that, right? I can use that database instead of Oracle. Why to pay licensing cost to the Oracle, right? The same task also doing by one of the open source, right? So at that time I want to change to PostgreSQL or MySQL because these are open source. So at that time I will move to PostgreSQL. So at that time I should not change any of my code. I should be able to change the configuration that from Oracle to MySQL, so that my complete program should behave as MySQL, not Oracle, right? That is second drawback, right? So and also relations. You need to maintain yourself with all the relations. Programmer has to take care of everything, right? So to avoid all these things, Hibernate came up into picture. So one is Hibernate avoids boiler template coding, while Hibernate avoids um database. Hibernate is a database independent code. right? You don't need to, you just need to change the configuration. So everything is taken care by the Hibernate. And relations maintained by the, you have to tell Hibernate one-to-one relationship or many-to-one relationship. That's it. It will take care of how to create, what is the foreign key. Everything has to taken care by the Hibernate framework. Okay, so it achieves all these features using the concept called object relational mapping. Okay, that's why Hibernate is called ORM framework, object relational mapping framework. So what it does is, for every table in the database, all right, for every table in the database, okay, every table in the database, it should have object in the Java. There should be a Pojo class. Pojo means plain old Java object. What is meant by Pojo? It should be a bean. Bean means it has getters and setters. All the attributes are private and default constructor. Right? So a small bean class. Right? So every bean class should have a table in the database. Okay? We have to map that each class in my in my project, each bean in my project, I have to map with the table in the database, so that whenever I save the object, the rows, the data in that object will be saved in the database automatically, right? Suppose if I say Hibernate, if I say Hibernate to save this EMP object, right? So this statement, right, this insert statement, employee.get name, get address, get age, I don't need to do it manually. Hibernate will take care of everything. I just need to say save. So it internally forms insert query depends on database, right? So it has to form an insert query. So this insert query may not work in Oracle, right? This insert query may not work in SQL Server, right? So in whatever the database, it will form a database specific insert query and it will save the object as a row, right? So everything is a object. Okay, and suppose relationships. Similarly, if you say there is an employee class in my project, there is a department class in my project. So you just said one to one from employee to department. So it will create employee in the database and a department table in the database. It will create a relationship. How the relationship will be defined in the database? Using the primary key and foreign key concepts, right? So primary key, foreign key will be declared automatically. You don't need to worry about how to create a, you doesn't need to have a much knowledge on the database. It will create automatically the tables, automatically rows, automatically relationships. You don't need to worry about all these things, right? So it is, you are just saying relationship between your objects, employee object, department object. What is the relationship? You are just telling relationship between the objects, but it is happening internally, relationship between the tables. That means you are mapping each object in uh, your project to each table in the database. That means you are mapping between these two, beans and tables. So we have to map manually in the configuration or annotations. So automatically this relationship happens. So what you are doing, you are writing a mapping, right? Okay, that's why it is called object relational mapping. See, there are in the market, there are many ORM frameworks. There are many ORM frameworks, Toplink, Hibernate, and there is Ibatis. So there are many ORM framework. Hibernate is very, very popular, and this 70% of industry is using Hibernate as a ORM framework. Okay, so uh, so this is about introduction about Hibernate. Do you have any doubts before we start with creating application in Hibernate? Any doubts? Okay, so I'm just going to Hibernate. I'm downloading Hibernate jar files. Okay, so Hibernate. So I'm just saying Hibernate download. Okay, I'm moving to here it's so I can take any from this I can take any of the uh, Hibernate libraries, right? So basically, suppose if I download 4.3.6, it also support Hibernate 2, Hibernate 3, Hibernate 4 backward compatibility. Normally, all Java frameworks supports backward compatibility. That means what is meant by backward compatibility? If even latest version also supports uh, previous version functionalities. Okay, so I don't want 5, I don't want 4. I want to go for somewhat old downloads. Okay, fourth point also works. I doesn't require 4 point right now. Okay, it's downloading. Right, so you need to go and download the Hibernate libraries in the Hibernate framework. You can also download 4.3.6, not an issue. All right, every version supports its backward compatibility, so you can download any of the latest versions. Okay, meanwhile I will repeat again. So what are the JDBC disadvantages? One is boiler template coding. So uh, we have to write a redundant code. We have to write a redundant code in the JDBC to create a connection, to get a statement object, run a query. Once we get a result set, we have to iterate over result set, and I have to get the data in the list. But and using JDBC, we have to write database dependent logic because all queries are not same in all the database. If you normal insert, update, delete, alter commands are very common, so those are maybe same for all the databases. But if you go beyond some joins or if you go if you go for some uh, methods, if you take functions, there are lot of functions provided by the each database. Suppose within the query, if you use that function, right? If you use that function, you may not see the same function for two different databases. Suppose if you use within query, if you use for the Oracle, if you use some function that will not work in the SQL server or any other databases. In future, if you want to change to one from Oracle to other databases, you have to analyze complete all your queries, and you have to change all your queries, right? You have to change all your queries depends on its depends on the database, and we also have to think about the impacts, right? So maybe equivalent function to date. Suppose if you use in Oracle to date function is there, but in the SQL server there is some method is there. So uh, but both may not return the same value, right? So it may return with the timestamp. So you have to go and edit your timestamp. So there are many impacts. So you have to think about, you have to tune your SQL queries. You have to tune your SQL queries in such a way to work in all the databases or that specific databases. Right. Other thing is relationship. So if you know about relationships between your objects, automatically Hibernate will take care of relations in the backend. But in case of JDBC, you have to manually uh, create the relations in the databases, and then you have to work in the Java coding, right? So in Hibernate, everything will be taken care by the Hibernate. You don't need to worry about the relations. You just need to mention relations between your objects, so that Hibernate will take care of relationship in the uh, databases, right? So in the Hibernate, you do the mappings between your class and the database table. Okay, so I will just go to MySQL query browser, since I am using MySQL as a database. So here I am creating. Okay, here I am creating one create new schema. Hibernate. I have already one schema called Hibernate, so I am saying Hibernate 1. Okay, so this is my schema I created. So currently there are no tables, right? Even I don't want to create any tables manually now. Earlier what I did in our earlier, right? What is our database? See, this one practice is our database, right? So in this we use employee. So we created manually this employee table. If you want to insert all this data, you use insert queries. Manually we created insert queries, right, on this employee object, and we ran. Right now I am using Hibernate 1 as schema. I don't create any tables now. Okay, so it seems it was downloaded. So show in folder. Okay, just deleting this. I'm going to my desktop. I'm going to D drive. My folder. Here I'm copying. Okay, here I'm extracting files. Okay, I'm just saying, okay. At Hibernate 3.5.3. So this is all, right? So there are several in the lib. There are several libraries. So I have to use all these libraries to do Hibernate. Okay, under lib folder there is here there is one jar file, one Hibernate 3.jar, right? This is the jar file we require, and under this lib file there are some required jar files you require. These are the dependencies for the Hibernate. So you have to use. See why it's required dependencies. Let's say it has to use some transactions inside Hibernate, because everything it is working in the database, right? So Hibernate internally doing all the tasks related to the databases, right? It needs the support of transaction API support, so that's why it's required JTA. And Hibernate uses SLF4j for logging internally, so that's why SLF4j API. DOM4j, see, it's everything we require configuration, XML configuration, right? XML is the one we use, so that's why DOM4j. I mean, if you use as XML, again in the Hibernate we use XML as a configuration or annotation as a configuration. Anything we can use. Okay, so and commons collection, internally it uses this API, Apache's commons, and this is one of the API internally it's for use. Okay, so these are all dependencies to create Hibernate application. So what I will do is I am creating new Java project. Now just running a small JDBC application, I just require Java project, right? Similarly, I am taking a small Java project. I doesn't require a dynamic web project. So here other Java project. Next, Hibernate. So use my own GRE. Next, finish. So now it just created a small uh, project, normal Java project. So I want to make it as a Hibernate support project, right? So I just need to add the jar files. So how to add? Build path, configure build path. So it is from external, right? So I have to say external jars, right? So Hibernate ours is under Hibernate, right? Hibernate. This is the one, and under leaf there are required all these, and JPA, we use JPA in our annotations. Annotations is nothing but JPA, so I am including that also. And there is some Java assist, we require this also. Okay, so we require all these Java files to run a simple Hibernate application. Okay, and I am clicking OK. So now my application become Hibernate support project. Okay, so now what I am doing is we need to create a configuration file. Every Hibernate application, there is a configuration file called hibernate-cfg.xml. Okay, so I'm creating one XML. Okay, so the name of the XML is hibernate-cfg.xml. Okay, this is the XML I'm creating. So here I need to write all database configuration details. Here I need to provide what is the database, what is the JDBC URL, what is username, what is the password. So I need to provide all this information in a format, in a tags, right? It's a XML predefined tags, right? So I don't need to remember all the tags. You can in the same library, right? In the same library, in one of the projects it provides. If you go project, so you can find Hibernate XML files. So you can copy and paste there, Hibernate hyphen CFG. Okay, I got many of the things, CFG.xml. Right, these are all the XML files. So I can create one of them. So okay, I can take this. Okay, and by the way, hibernate.cfg.xml, I think we have created hibernate hyphen, right? So I am renaming it. Okay, I am renaming hibernate.cfg.xml. Okay, so I am copy paste same. Control V. Okay, so you are getting this XML, right? I mean, you are getting these XMLs along with your project, right? So I have taken one of the XML where we have this database configuration. So here I don't need to remember Hibernate configuration, session factory property, right? So you can take it from your library itself. Okay, so the same thing I copied here. So now I am writing my own connection URLs, my own drivers are done. Okay, so here it uses HSQL DB as a database, so I don't want to use that. I want to use my own MySQL. So, and one more thing, right? You have to also in the build path you have to place your database driver also. Add external jar. I think it should be in. Okay, I can add this one. Okay, so currently I'm not. Okay, so first, what is the connection driver class? What is the driver we are using? com.mysql.jdbc.driver, right? So you can copy this from our JDBC programs. So maybe we have written in web.xml, right? So in the web.xml, we have written driver class. So the same driver I'm using here. Okay. And what is the JDBC URL? So again, this, but the schema name I have to change instead of practice. What is the schema name? Hibernate 1. Hibernate 1. What is the username? Root. What is the password? Root. I'm using HSQL, not my. I'm using MySQL, not HSQL. So I have to write MySQL. So if we have any doubts in this package, right? So spelling or something, in the libraries, in the reference libraries under Hibernate, right? We can check. I mean, in this jar file, we have several classes, right? So we should check for these classes. So what is the package? Or Hibernate dialect, or Hibernate dialect. Dialect is the package. Here, they're all packages are Postgres, Sybase, right? All dialect are declared Oracle 9i, Oracle 8i, right? MySQL is one of the thing. MySQL dialect I'm using now. So spelling is correct on MySQL dialect. So this class I'm using. This class I'm opening from jar file, hibernate3.jar, right? So sessions, some framework is using some sessions, so I don't want to touch it. Provider, we will discuss more about this second level cache in the later. So currently no cache provider I'm using. I will tell you what to show SQL. If you want to show the SQL in the log in the output, we have to use true, otherwise we have to false. And I will come to this point, create in a couple of minutes. What is create? So currently HBM2 DDL auto is doing is create option. Currently mapping, I don't use any mapping right now. Okay, I will tell you about what is mapping. So this is about configuration. This is about configuration. So what all I did, hibernate.cfg.xml I created. I have copied the content of, instead of remembering all writing from the scratch, as we are learning Hibernate, and we need to first uh, don't try to learn about all these tags. First, we'll this XML is nothing but it's a uh, predefined. I mean, it's already is a template for every Hibernate application. You definitely use this hibernate.cfg.xml every time. We normally copy paste all this information. So Hibernate configuration is the base tag, session factory is sub tag, and all properties we have to provide to session factory. Session factory is a object. Uh, is a Hibernate object. So we will create object uh, in this main application. These are all properties, database configuration basically. So if you are using any of the database, so all this database specific information, JDBC driver, URL, username and password you provide here, and some Hibernate configuration also you do here. So this CFG file is completely related to the database, right? Okay, now I am creating one class called employee. So I want to create in separate package. So references, sorry, I want to rename it. I want to delete this. I want to create a new class com Hibernate beans. Okay, employee private integer empid private string emp name or else name. Here also id is enough. Private integer age. Okay, right click, source, generate getters and setters. Okay, so I generated getters and setters. Now in Hibernate, bean, every bean, whatever the bean you are mapping, you are going to map into the database table. That bean is called entity. That bean is called entity. Okay, there may be a beans which you are not mapping the tables, right? Mapping tables that I don't call it as entity. So I call the beans which are tables in the database. Those are called entities. Okay, so currently I'm showing you annotations, creating annotations, right? I'm not showing you any XML right now. I'm showing you annotations. So entity. Okay, whenever I say entity, java.persistence. I want to use not Hibernate entity. I want to use java.persistence. What is Java persistence? Right? Currently, you are learning JPA with Hibernate. Right? JPA. What is meant by JPA? Java Persistency API. Right? So it provides. This is a standard. So every ORM framework should support Java Persistency API. Okay, Java Persistency API should be supported by all of the ORM frameworks, right? It's a standard. Okay, so since it's a standard, so it's a generic in everywhere. Okay, so I have to use @entity. Whenever you say @entity, it automatically generates some. Uh, it's automatically generates a table in the database. Okay, and in this table, employee, assume that employee is a table, id is a let's say primary key. Okay, if it is a primary key, you have to use annotation called @id. @id. So again I have to use java.persistence annotation only. You should not use other. Okay, so I am using id. So remaining I am not touching. Okay, we will see how it generates remaining in a little while. So I am creating a Java application, Java main class, some package name here. Hibernate client, something. I generate main. Okay. Now in Hibernate, first you have to create the session factory object. Session factory is the object. It contains all the database configuration. So where the session factory in Hibernate configuration, session factory holds all the database information, right? So I have to get this session factory object using this configuration, right? So I have to use session factory. I have to use session factory. Session factory equal to, how to create a session factory object. You have to use new configuration, right? Configure. If you say configure, by default it configures the hibernate.cfg.xml. You don't need to tell that hibernate.cfg.xml is the configuration file. Build session factory. This is the way of creating a session factory object, right? So from the session factory, I need to open a session. I have to create Hibernate session equal to session factory dot open session. Okay, so now I want to create employee object, employee emp equal to new employee. Okay, employee dot set id as 1, employee dot set name as something, employee dot set age something. So in order to save, in order to persist, we call it as persist. Persist means save. Okay. From today we use the term called persist. Persist means save. I am persisting this employee object, so I have to use session dot save. Okay, what is the object I am saving? Employee. That's it. I don't need to write any insert queries. I don't need to write any insert queries. Once it is completed, I am saying session dot close. Okay, so I am just printing sysout. Employee saved successfully. Okay, again, so I am creating a session factory using the configuration which we have provided in the Hibernate config.xml. So new config.xml configure. By default, when you say configure, it is configuring Hibernate this XML. If you want to use your own XML, I mean, if you change the if you rename the file, right, you can also create your own file name. But when you say configure, you have to provide that file name, right? By default, if you don't provide any file name, it will take hibernate.cfg.xml as the file name. It reads that XML file and builds a session factory. Okay, on this session factory, you can get a session, one of the session, right? So this employee object you can save using that session. Session.save means it is persisting object information in the database. Okay, so I'll just run and show you. Run as Java application. So we get some error with the SL4J. It's not finding build path. SL4J API is already there. No class definition found. Static logger. Okay, so let me see after dot this file is there or not in this SL4J. So it's pointing to wrong API, I think so. Okay. Build path, configure build path, add external jars, my computers. Okay, so now it is running fine. Build path, configure build path, we have to use add external jar in on the desktop. I'm using MySQL connector. Now run as Java application. So it is saying unknown entity. Okay, so in the CFG file, right, we have to provide the mapping class. So mapping class as com dot hibernate dot beans dot employee. Okay, so we have to provide mapping information. So what you are mapping to the database. So we have to provide this employee object here. So in Hibernate client, I'm just run as Java application. Okay, employee saved successfully. So what I did is I created, I mapped the same files, I mapped the same jar files, but I mapped some 3.6.4 jar files. I didn't do anything. I'm not sure why it is not working with the 3.5 jar files. So I used 3.6.4, which I already have. So I'm using that jar files, right? So that is only working. Otherwise, it is giving some error with the logs. Okay, employee saved successfully. So if I go to this database, right? If I refresh Hibernate 1, if I refresh, right, there is an employee table automatically created. If I run this select query on this employee, okay, so if I edit table, so there is an ID, it's a primary key, right? There is an ID primary key. So how it is created? This employee table ID as a primary key, age and age and name, and also it also created data types also. It also created data types, integer, varchar. So how it is created integer, how it is created varchar? Suppose if it is Oracle, right? If it is a Oracle, so what is the data type for the integer in the Oracle? It's a number. There is no integer data type in the Oracle, right? It's a number. So if it is a Oracle, if you run the same program, if Oracle has a database, it creates a data type in the Oracle called number. That means Hibernate is taking care of creating a tables in the database, and it knows how to map. That means the Java types integer class should be mapped to the integer data type in the MySQL database. It knows, right? So when you create an employee as in the configuration, when you create in the configuration CFG file, when you create mapping class as employee, so it checks for the employee, what are the data types in the employee, right? So it creates all the data types in the database as well. Okay, in this, so it maps Java data types with the database data types. Okay, Java data type integer should be mapped with the data type of MySQL. Similarly, if you use SQL Server or Oracle, so it creates its own data type, its own number data type, right? ID, age, name, and primary key automatically created because we mentioned primary key here as ID, right? Here add ID. So actually, it doesn't create any it doesn't create any rows, right? Even though we store, we save the session because the transaction not yet committed. So by default transaction enabled. Okay, by default transaction enabled. So I have to say session dot before committing. I have to say session dot begin transaction. Okay. After saving, I have to say session dot get transaction dot commit. Okay, I have to say session dot begin transaction on the same transaction object. I can use session dot get transaction. I will get the same transaction object, whatever it was begin, and I am saying commit. So now I am refreshing that. I am running again. Okay, if you see here, Hibernate insert query you are able to see. So it is showing an insert query. Why it is showing insert query here? So because we configured in the CFG file show SQL as true. Because of this property show SQL as true, we are seeing this query, internal query. Hibernate is doing this. We are not doing inserting any query, right? Hibernate is doing this, and employee added successfully. If we go and refresh the employee table, okay, so there is a data I added already. Okay, so because of this property show SQL as true configured, so I'm able to see the queries in the console. Okay, so first what I did, I created a small Java project. I added Hibernate jars under 3.6.4 my distribution, and also database jar file. I created .cfg file, .cfg.xml file. There I mentioned all the database related stuff, all JDBC URL, driver, username and password, and what is the dialect MySQL, and how we are manage the session context. So this is Hibernate specific session management, and second level cache. We will discuss more about this second level cache later. So currently I am not using any cache, so I am using no cache provider. Show SQL as true I am configuring because of I want to see the queries how the Hibernate is preparing. So that's why show SQL as true, and create we will discuss tomorrow. Okay, so and there is a beans employee. So because this I am mapping to the database, that's why this is called an entity. So I'm just saying entity. Entity is in persistency API annotations. So Java persistency API is a standard. We use those annotations from right now, and ID whenever if you mention @annotation ID, this means it's a primary key in the table. Okay, every entity has to define in the CFG file as a mapping class. Okay, so coming to the main class, Hibernate client. So here I need to get the session factory using this build factory method, and I have to open the session. I have to begin the transaction. Once you save the object, you persist the object. See, whenever you say session.save employee, it is creating insert query. Whenever you say save, it is creating insert query automatically. Right? This is the mapping. So because of the mapping only, it is creating. Right? See, if you observe here in employee.java, ID, name, age, the same names, ID, name, age, it was created here. ID, name, age. You can also customize the names. We will see in the future classes. Okay, in the Hibernate client, I am just saying session.save, and I am committing the transaction. And then I am closing the session. So employee save successful. I am printing some message. So if I run this application, I got this insert query I am able to see in the console. So Hibernate is generating this insert query. We are not writing any insert query. Hibernate is generating insert query based on database specific. Any doubts?